Here we go. Okay, hey everybody. This is our webinar series of Ohio Protects Pollinators. I'm Alyssa Yapel. I'm going to quickly introduce my wonderful co-workers here. Jenna Winters, who is with our Division of Parks and Watercraft, and she's going to be helping me with questions today. And then I have Lauren Broderick from Maumee Bay in Northwest Ohio, and Julie Gee from Burr Oak in Southeast Ohio. So thank you for joining us. As you can see, Lauren's in Northwest and Julie's Southeast Ohio. Jenna and I are both in Central Ohio, and I thought it'd be kind of neat if you guys let us know where you're from. So go ahead and put that in the Q&A. Let us know you're here, say hello, ask us any questions, and tell us where you're joining us from. Your Q&A box is how you can communicate with us today. So ask us questions throughout, and Jenna and I will make sure that Lauren gets those. Lauren and Julie get those. So we started this webinar series 4 weeks ago, and since we have talked about so many different pollinators, butterflies, caterpillars, hummingbirds and flies, beetles and bees, and it seems like each webinar that we have done, we've gotten some questions about gardening for pollinators. And so that's why, today we thought we'll go a little bit more in depth about how you can help pollinators in your garden, in your backyard. And if you're like me, you definitely need help. You need all the tips you can get, because I do not have a green thumb, and that is why I have my awesome expert coworkers with me today. So once again, tell us where you're from in the Q&A box. We would love to hear if you have a pollinator garden of your own. Put it on Facebook and hashtag Ohio Protects Pollinators. But that's, I think, enough of me talking. I'm going to kick it over now to Lauren, and Lauren is going to show us how to make a seed ball, which is an awesome activity, I think, for kids and families. So here you go.
All right. So, like Alyssa mentioned, my name is Lauren Broderick. I am the naturalist at Maumee Bay State Park up by Lake Erie in Northwest Ohio. And today I'm actually doing two activities. We're going to be making a seed ball, which is a very fun activity, and also a bee bath. Not a bird bath, a bee bath. So first we're going to start off with getting our hands a little bit dirty with our seed ball. So seed balls are really fun. They're really simple. They're great for all ages. You can be really little and doing them, and you can be as old as I am doing them as well. But you don't really need much. You can actually use just the dirt in your backyard. I'm really lucky up here in Northwest Ohio. I'm where the Great Black Swamp once was. So with that, there is a lot of clay, and that is the base of the seed ball I'm using today. So some of you can even just go dig in your own backyard and get that base that you need for the seed ball, but others might have to buy it, especially if you live in more sandy regions. So the first step for our seed ball is you just need to get some clay. I like to use air dry clay. You don't want to bake your seeds because that will kill your seeds. So air dry clay is best if you don't have clay available in your soil. I use non-toxic because I have pets and I have wildlife in my backyard, so I want to make sure I'm not putting anything toxic in the ground if I can avoid it. So non-toxic clay, you need some dirt, just regular potting soil will work, dirt from your own backyard, or you can buy some seed starting dirt as well, and you need seeds. I have two types of seeds with me today. I have a packet of just mixed pollinators, mixed wildflower seeds, and then I also have with me a really good, one of my favorite plants, the milkweed. So if you like pollinators, we all know about the monarch butterfly, but I have some milkweed seeds. The only downside with milkweed seeds, and one of the reasons why you should do this activity outside because it's a little bit messy, is milkweed use wind dispersal. So they spread their seeds by the wind. And with that, you get this nice fluff, nice silk at the end of the seed. So I actually had to pre-fluff, take all the fluff off my seeds and before I started this. Otherwise, if I open up a milkweed pod, I will literally have piles of seeds and fluff flying in the air, and I will find it all year long. So just take note, if you're using milkweed from a pod, you want to do this activity outside. So my base of my clay, my soil, and then I have a little bit of milkweed seed and some vermiculite, which is a good seed starter as well. You want to make sure your clay is not too dry. You want it so you can actually, you're kind of almost making like a mud pie, but not soaking wet. So you just want it to still be a little bit damp, not too muddy, so it's sticking all over you. You want your seeds to stick to it, but you don't want it to stick completely to your hands. The first thing I like to do is kind of make a seed pancake or clay pancake for my seeds. So nice and flat. And then to give my seeds a boost, I could just put the seeds straight into the clay, but if you mix the soil and the seed starter in, it gives the seeds a little extra oomph in order to start. So I'll put my seeds in, I'll just kind of tap down. My clay is a little bit dry, it's starting to kind of come apart. So what I'll do is I'll add some water. I like to use spray bottles, but if you're outside, you can literally just dip your hands into the water, get your hands wet, put it on your clay. You can dip your clay into the water. It's really fun with kids. It can be trial and error. They might do too much. So you kind of have to learn that ratio of how much clay you need versus how much water you need. So if it's too wet, add more clay. If it's too dry, add more water. So I'm mixing those seeds in. But like I said, I wanted to give them a little bit of an oomph. So I'm going to mix my vermiculite and my potting soil together and roll my clay seed ball into that mixture here. And you can't have fun if you don't make a mess. So another reason why this activity is good to do outside. But once I do that, all I need to do is kind of just form that ball. It works really nicely to form balls, especially if you're wanting to plant these plants and like we have a lot of land, a lot of acreage. Because the nice part about these, once they've hardened, they end up looking like this, and you can chunk these pretty far away. So if you really want to go out there and you have, say you have a few acres of land or you have a really big backyard and you want your kids to have some fun while they're planting too, rather than just doing the traditional dig in, put the seeds down method, you can have those kids chunk them as far, or you yourself can chunk them as far as you want them to go. So you'll just roll that ball, kind of guess, it should kind of almost look like an Oreo cookie, just kind of like the cookies and cream look to it. You don't want it to be solid because you want it to still be able to stick together and hold on to those seeds, but you don't want it to be completely white like the clay was. So you kind of just want that nice cookies and cream mixture looking. But the next most important step is you need to give this a chance to dry. I know when you're gardening, it's super exciting. You just want to go throw the seeds out. You want to see those plants come up immediately, but gardening requires patience. And step one, we got to let this dry. The best thing to do for it to dry is you actually put it in a permeable bag. So I like to use paper bags, and you set it in there. It usually takes about 2 to 3 days for it to fully dry, especially depending on humidity. So I set this in an area that is not in direct sunlight because I don't want those seeds to start germinating, because remember we did use water. So I set it somewhere not direct sunlight, somewhere that's not too hot, but somewhere that's warm enough that the clay ball will still be able to dry. So a really good place is maybe in your garage, on your porch, somewhere not in sunlight and not going to get hit by rain. So there is my seed ball. So when you are getting ready to plant these, know what types of seeds you use, know what sunlight those plants require, and know how much water they'll need. So if you have a plant that likes really dry, sandy soils, you don't want to throw these seed balls right next to a creek or a river and have them get too wet and there's not enough drainage. Or if you have a plant that needs a lot of shade, don't put it in the direct sun because your plant won't do well. But if you get these seed balls, let them dry, put them where they need to go. You'll have some really neat experiences and some nice happy plants for you that will attract some pollinators. So that's our little seed ball experiment. We do have instructions to this that we will post as well. So if you do not remember all of the steps, don't worry, we got you covered. We'll have posts for you for this. So that concludes my seed balls. However, I'm not done with you. My next activity is called a bee bath. So it is like a bird bath, like the name implies. However, it's for bees or for our pollinators. So bees are much smaller than birds. So we can kind of do this on a little smaller level. Now, if you want to go big, you're welcome to. The bees will appreciate it. But you can also do really small. So like all living things, we need water, including our bee friends. And so with that, we can actually use materials that we can find around our house to build a little bath. So what I'm using today is I'm actually using an old butter dish that I'm repurposing. This is going to be basically the water dish, the bath part for my bees. And I'm using a little terracotta pot to kind of give it some elevation above the ground. And you only get, if you just have a plate, an old plate that you don't really use anymore, maybe it's chipped, you can use that, place it directly in the ground, totally fine. I also have this nice copper measuring cup that lost its handle, so I was like, ooh, this might look really nice as well. The one thing to consider when you're doing this, you can attract bees, but you can attract other pollinators as well. You might get butterflies, you might also get flies, beetles, everything is going to get thirsty at some point, so they might visit you. So just note that maybe you don't want to put this right next to your front door where you're going to be walking to and from, because you might get visitors, and not everybody may appreciate the insect visitors, and they might not appreciate going inside your house and not being able to get back outside where they have their food. So I have my dish, I have my terracotta pot, and it's pretty simple. All you need to do is find a space where you'd like it, put them together, and the most important part is bees aren't super great swimmers. They're supposed to be in the air, they're not aquatic. So in order to keep them from drowning, rather than birds, we can just fill it up with water, the birds are happy, good to go. You have to add some rocks. Solitary bees in particular tend to like the violet and blue tones. So I'm looking to attract some solitary bees. So I have a lot of leftover crafts during this quarantine time. And so I have some leftover blue glass stones that I'm going to put in my base. However, you can use things from rocks that you find in your yard, gravel. If you have sticks, you can put sticks in there, but just basically giving the bees or any of the insect visitors a way to get out of the water in case they fall in and can't fly out. So essentially all you have to do, place your my nice decorative pebbles here, and then top it off with some water. And here I have my bee bath. So I place this outside. I usually prefer to place this areas where the bees are going to be visiting anyway. So if I have some flowers, I kind of want to tuck it in with the flowers. And as you can see, just put the water in there. You want to make sure that there's some rocks sticking up and they're stacked on top of each other, so the bees can use it as a ramp, or any of the insects can use it as a ramp to get out. But this is pretty simple. It's really fun for the kids to do. They can use found items. If you have an old container, you can put this on the ground, put rocks in it. The bigger the container, the deeper the container, the longer it'll take for it to evaporate, but the bigger the rocks, the bigger materials you're going to need to put in there so the insects can get out. So that's just one thing to consider, but you can use any materials that you have available to you. You can get as creative as you want, which will be, the bees will all enjoy it no matter how it looks. So this is my quick and simple bee bath. Super fun, super creative. If you guys make them, please feel free to post them on our social media. We'd love to see your own little creations. They work really well in fairy gardens or even in full-blown planned out gardens as well. You can put it right next to your bird bath and you'll have a bee bath. Make the bees happy as well. And on that note, so I have some things to add to your garden.
Oh, sorry, Lauren. I just sent Julie live. Should I come back to you?
Oh, no, it's okay. I was just going to say, Julie has some great tips for how to make your garden for pollinators. So we'll go on to Julie.
And you're live, Julie. So I think you have a PowerPoint for us.
Yes.
There. Okay, I'm going to put this up. Just 1 second here. Okay. Sending live, and everybody should see it. There you go. Perfect.
Okay, we all set then?
Yep, we're good.
All right, great. Hi, everybody. Today I wanted to share with you some tips and pointers for establishing a pollinator garden at home. So for those of you that really have been thinking about doing this, these are going to be some steps that you can take to be successful for establishing this garden of your own at home. So let's get to the steps. The first step as you're looking at establishing your garden is to remove the weeds in the area where you're going to establish your garden. And the best way to do that is to basically smother the grass and the weeds and whatever else you have growing there with black plastic. And it's best to use the very heavy black plastic sheeting that you can get from any local hardware store. It's not hard to find at all, but it's just really important that you don't get a thin, but a thick plastic sheeting. Then you're going to cover up the area where you're going to put the garden. And keep in mind that while this plastic is on the ground, we could have thunderstorms or some pretty heavy winds. So you want to make sure that you have that anchored to the ground somehow. You could put bricks or concrete block on it. You could use landscape staples or anchors, whatever it is, but just make sure it's anchored down good so that it doesn't blow away on you. And if you do this, it's going to take about 2 months in the summer to kill the grass and the weeds underneath this black plastic. If for some reason you decide to do this process later, for instance, if you started in the late fall or winter, then it could take up to 6 months to kill the grass and the weeds. It will be a quicker process in the summer because the sun is higher in the sky, and of course it's warmer, and so it's more effective at quickly taking care of those weeds or grasses and other plants. So that's really simple to do. Then the next step, after you remove the plastic, you're going to want to till the area. And you can till the dead grass and the dead weeds right into the soil if you want to. You can also rake that dead material off of the soil. It really doesn't matter. Either way is fine. Once you till up the area, you'll then want to remove rocks and big clumps of clay that could impede the growth of your new plants. If you can, also, I would recommend that you add some type of compost to your soil to give your new plants the best possible nutrients in that soil. It could be compost that you have at home if you've got a compost pile, or you could buy manure or compost at a garden center. Any type of compost is good. It just really helps those new plants along when you first put them into the ground. Then you've killed the grass, you've killed the weeds, you've prepared your soil, and it's time to plant. Excuse me. Now, I highly recommend that you plant native perennials. Why should you use native plants? First of all, native plants are adapted to living in Ohio and thriving in Ohio. This means that if we have a drought, if we have a very harsh cold winter, it doesn't matter to these plants because they are used to living in Ohio and they are adapted for Ohio's climate and Ohio's soils. So they're really the best plants for you to choose. Another reason for using natives is that the native plants are going to attract the native pollinators that you want, like the bees and the butterflies and the wasps and the ants and the beetles, and of course the birds that we have. These pollinators have developed along with the native plants. So you're going to have more pollinators come to your garden if you use native plants. Also, I mentioned using perennials. Perennial plants come up year after year after you plant them. So when you plant perennials, you only have to plant them once and you're done. They'll continue to come up year after year after year. For me, I like that because it's easy. I don't want to have to go back to my pollinator garden every year and keep planting it over and over again. So perennials are also just a fabulous choice for you. Another reason for planting natives is that it increases the biodiversity of your garden, of your lawn, of your home property, of the whole area that you are living in. This happens because when you plant natives, not only will the typical pollinators be attracted, but birds like goldfinches will come and eat the seeds off of your dried seed heads in the fall and winter. Of course, you'll have hummingbirds that will come to your garden, and you may have meadow voles, like I've pictured here, that will come and eat the seeds in your garden. If you have meadow voles, that means you may have something that wants to eat the meadow voles, like perhaps a snake or two. Also, you may have hawks that come along and prey upon the birds that are in your garden. So basically, you are creating an entire food web in your pollinator garden by using natives. When you go to plant, you're going to have the choice of using actual plants or seeds. And so I wanted to review with you the pros and the cons of using plants versus using seeds. So first of all, if you put in plants, you are going to see faster results in your pollinator garden. Plants will grow quicker and you'll see them blossoming sooner. But plants are good for small areas and seeds are good for large areas. For instance, if you're going to plant a pollinator garden that is maybe 2/10 of an acre or larger, I would recommend that you use seeds. It's going to be a lot easier for you to disperse the seeds over a large area, and it will be less expensive also than if you have to go out and buy all of the plants and then plant all these plants in this acreage that you're trying to convert into a pollinator area. Another thing to consider with plants versus seeds, seeds require less care at the beginning because basically you're dispersing them over your area, and then you're going to roll over the seeds with a garden roller, and you'll put some mulch on, which I'll talk about in just a second. With plants, when you plant the plants in the spring or the fall, but particularly in the spring, if we get a hot spell all of a sudden, you are going to have to keep watering those plants and watering and watering, honestly, on a daily basis. That has happened to me, where I've put my plants in the spring and then all of a sudden summer hit and I had to keep on watering these plants, which you would not have to do that with seeds. Plants you can put in the spring or the fall. For seeds, the best time to put seeds out is late fall or early winter so that they can just sit there in a dormant state until spring comes. And it's good for seeds, a lot of seeds, to go through a freeze-thaw cycle. So that's another consideration for you. When are you going to be ready to plant your new pollinator garden area? So that takes us to the fourth step for success as you develop your pollinator garden, and that is to put some mulch on right after you have planted the garden. It's important for you to control weeds right away so they don't get out of hand. Even though you've killed most of the weeds and the grass with the black plastic, there are always a few that will survive that process. So you'll have to put some mulch on to maintain control of those that are still trying to come up. And of course, there are always weeds that come in from the edges of your garden plot that you never did try to kill. So you'll want to just put a layer of mulch down so that you can easily remove any weeds right after planting when your new plants are trying to really get a great foothold, or your seed is just starting to come up as young plants that need a little extra help. Then, of course, you're going to need to not only weed, but you'll need to water, especially after your initial planting. Once your plants are established, you will not have to water very much. But when you first put new plants in, you're going to have to really keep track of them and just keep checking on them, checking on weeds, watering them. This is the most intensive part and most time-consuming part of your establishment of your pollinator garden. This first season that you're getting the plants established and giving them a really good chance of doing well and surviving. Now, once your pollinator garden is established, you will have to do very little to it if you have used native plants. So this is another reason to use natives. Once those plants are established, I can promise you, you will have to give them very little attention. You'll still have to do some weeding, but you will not have to water your garden at all once it's established if you are using native plants. And again, for me, I love that because it's a time saver. The garden looks lovely and beautiful, and all I have to do is go out and just keep track of some weeds. But you don't have to worry about them in the summer during a drought. If it's hot, you don't have to worry about them in the winter. They just take care of themselves. So again, just make sure you use perennials, and I think you'll be very happy. So where do you get native plants? I would start with your local nursery. Go in and ask for natives, and you will have to be very specific if you are using a local nursery. Make sure that they give you natives. I have gone into nurseries before, and even the nursery owner really isn't sure about what you're asking for. So the best thing is to have actual genus species names of the native plants that you want, so you can be sure that that's what you're getting. A lot of places in Ohio, a lot of localities do have native plant specific nurseries. So I would highly recommend that you look around your area and see if you can find a local nursery that specializes in native plants. If you can't find somewhere local to get your native plants, one of my favorite online resources for natives is called Prairie Nursery. And I've been buying plants from Prairie Nursery for probably 15 years at least. I have used Prairie Nursery plants both in my home gardens and also in my pollinator gardens at Burr Oak State Park. You can order plants or seed from Prairie Nursery. They ship plants in a box, believe it or not. And I know the first time I received my plants, I was like, oh my goodness, how are these plants going to do being shipped in a box? They come, they look great. You put them out for a few days and give them water, and then you can plant them right into your garden. Prairie Nursery also, I can highly recommend for their customer service. One time I had a couple of plants, I got them in the ground, and 3 months later they had died, and they immediately sent me out replacements without question. So I can highly recommend them. Another source for native plants is to ask neighbors, landowners. Maybe there's an area that's being developed and you know there are some good native plants there that are going to be destroyed by development, and you can go and dig those native plants out if you get permission. Now, I wanted to show you an actual pollinator garden. So I want to show you the pollinator garden that I have at my house. And I'm going to show you what it looks like now, and then I'll show you what it looks like when it's blooming in the summertime. So right now, this is what my pollinator garden looks like at home. I took this picture this morning in the rain. So this is what it looks like. It's really green, and it's very fun to go out in the spring to see the plants coming up. Usually in March they start coming up and you can see what's going on and how it's doing. Also, the spring is a really good time to divide plants out of your garden. If you have too much of one kind, you can give some to your friends to use in their garden. But this is what it's going to look like in the spring, just nice and green, all the plants getting taller and taller as they're developing towards the point that they'll be blossoming. Then usually in June, mid to late June and in through July and then through the fall, this is what you're going to have in your pollinator garden at home. So this is my garden at home in the summertime. And the red flowers are Monarda or bee balm. And the orange in the foreground is butterfly milkweed. The tallest plants that you can see growing there are purple coneflower. Then here's another view with some black-eyed Susan. And I've got some swamp milkweed, which is the plant. I'm hoping you can see my pointer here, my mouse pointer. This is swamp milkweed. And here's some swamp milk. Yes.
Hey, while you're talking about milkweed, I think Lauren mentioned her favorite flower for butterflies was milkweed earlier, and somebody had asked what your favorite flower for attracting butterflies is. So I thought I'd just chime in and put that question out real quick.
Oh, Alyssa, the timing was great because in just a second, I'm going to show you what my favorite flower for attracting butterflies is. And that's already part of my presentation here. So again, you can see the black-eyed Susan and purple coneflowers, the Monarda, swamp milkweed. And then I just love butterfly milkweed, which is this bright orange flower that you have here that does attract monarchs. And I know that some of you, if you attended the previous webinars, you know that monarch butterflies are dependent on milkweed species to complete their life cycle. So I have in my pollinator gardens, I have both the butterfly milkweed, which is this bright orange color, and I also have the swamp milkweed, which is the really pretty, I would call it a combination between pink and lavender. And that's also a great milkweed to have for monarchs. So yeah, that's just, also, if this flower, if the butterfly milkweed looks familiar to any of you, it grows readily along roadsides that are not being mowed. So if you have been traveling around and you've seen this bright orange flower growing in the summertime along a roadside, it might be butterfly milkweed that you're seeing growing along that roadside. Another image of the butterfly garden, just showing all this beauty. I have to tell you, once you get a pollinator garden going and established, it really will bring you joy to go out and see not just the colors, but the beauty with all of the insects flying around and all the life in this garden. It will give you joy in life, and it will up your spirits. It's just so fabulous. You will have this garden blooming through usually to the beginning of October is when you'll still have flowers in this garden blooming. And what's really nice about a native garden using native plants is that you let all of these flowers go to seed and then they just reseed themselves. So your garden just keeps growing and growing over the years once you get it established, and you'll actually end up having to take some plants out and give away because you'll run out of space as it self-seeds itself. But it's really fabulous because it'll just fill in all the empty places when you let these plants go to seed, and your garden just gets, like I said, more diverse and more beautiful as time goes on. These are two butterflies that I photographed last summer in my garden. And the one on the left is on a purple coneflower. It's a great spangled fritillary. The one on the right is on the Monarda or bee balm, and it's a spice bush swallowtail butterfly. So I see lots of different types of butterflies in my pollinator garden, but as you know, lots of bees and wasps and ants and just so many different, I see insects in my garden that I don't know what they are. It's really fun to be able to find things you're just wondering, I wonder what kind of insect that is. Some resources that I wanted to share with you. We already talked about Prairie Nursery, which is a great place that I just like to get both plants and seeds. And then let me go to the book next. And Alyssa, are they able to see this book I'm holding up okay?
Let me enlarge your screen if that's okay. 1 second. They should be able to see you in just a second here. There you go.
Okay, thank you. This is called Butterfly Gardening, Creating Summer Magic in Your Garden. And it's a really nice book if you want to focus particularly on butterflies and butterfly gardening. Inside, it has actual plans for laying out a butterfly garden on either a small scale or even a larger scale. So they give nice plans, and there's information on what are some of the better plants for using for nectaring butterflies, and what are the plants that you need to provide for larval stages of the butterfly. But it's a really nice book that I can highly recommend. And then I'm going to go to the websites that I have listed here so that you can see very good websites.
Oh, okay. Can you guys?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna have.
Jenna and Lauren, is that showing up?
Yes.
Okay.
Just the PowerPoints, though, not the websites.
I'm going to end the show and then get my, okay. So one of the, is this visible now, Alyssa?
Yes.
Okay. This is a great website from the Xerces Society, and they are a really interesting nonprofit organization that focuses on helping out all invertebrates. So they're very much interested in pollinators. They have a variety of things. This is their homepage where they talk about developing gardens for pollinators. And here are some of their main areas that you can learn a lot about: creating, restoring, and managing habitat. And then they talk about avoiding pesticides and picking the right plants. You can actually sign a pollinator protection pledge and get a little sign to put in your garden that indicates that you're providing pollinator habitat. I really like that. I think that's a nice thing to do for people. So lots of great information here on this website. Another website specifically for kids is this kids gardening site that has a ton of garden activities that you can do with children. They have one thing that caught my eye was a pollinator journal, encouraging kids to go outside into the pollinator garden and write or draw about what they see. And then I know one that Alyssa really liked was this garden activities, building a fairy house in the pollinator garden area, which finding all sorts of natural materials and building a little fairy house in the garden would be a great thing for kids to do. But you can see there's a lot of ideas here for you to do with your kids at home, in and around your garden. So this is a great website to check out.
Awesome. Hey, Julie, we have a question. Is it better to plant in the sun or in the shade?
All of the pollinator garden plants that I talked about today and that are in my garden at home are sun-loving plants. And most of the summer plants that you're going to put into a pollinator garden are going to be sun-loving, so you want them to have direct sun, absolutely.
And another question, kind of a two-part. Should you plant, is it better to plant directly into the ground or a raised bed? And also, how far apart should you plant the flowers from each other?
Oh, you could do either raised bed or directly in the ground. It really doesn't matter. Either way is fine, as long as your raised bed has a good good healthy soil in it. That's totally fine. And when you buy your plants, they will have recommendations for each species as to how far apart you should plant them. That always comes with the plant when you get them, either online or if you go to a local nursery, they're going to tell you. Each species is a little bit different. In general, you're looking at about a foot apart, planting these plants about a foot apart from each other. Sometimes though, it might be 18 inches. So it's just good to see what's recommended from the grower that you get your plants from.
Awesome, thank you.
Oh, yes.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Another resource I had was this organization called Wild Ones. And this is a nonprofit organization that is from around the country. We actually have 6 local chapters in Ohio. This organization is very active in promoting using native plants, not only in gardens, but in your whole landscape at home. So you might want to check out their website sometime. If you really get interested in native plant gardening and you start going beyond your garden even and say to yourself, okay, I think I'd like to use native plants everywhere in my home landscape. Wild Ones would be a good organization for you to connect with. And again, we have local chapters of this national organization right here in Ohio, so you could connect with one of those local chapters.
Hey, Julie, somebody wrote in a question. Are there Ohio native plants that will thrive in the shade?
Oh, yes, there are definitely Ohio native plants that will thrive in the shade. Many of them are the spring wildflowers that we just got, at least here in Southeast Ohio, we're kind of done with our spring wildflower blooming season. So yes, you could create, if you wanted to, you could create what I would call a shade garden. And if you did that, a lot of those native plants from Ohio are going to be spring bloomers. There are some shade-loving bloomers in Ohio. There just aren't as many shade bloomers for pollinators that you're going to attract as you would with the sun-loving ones. I will say that. I mean, all flowers, their goal is to attract a pollinator. So even if it's growing in the shade, that flower wants the pollinators to come to it. But typically, when you think about establishing a pollinator garden just for pollinators, you're going to get many more with the sun-loving plants that bloom in the summertime.
Okay, I have a question for Lauren, so I'm going to send her live. So Lauren, somebody had asked about the bee bath you talked about, and do mosquitoes get in it? So what do you do about mosquitoes, and how do you clean the bee bath?
Ah, yes, mosquitoes. I'm well versed in mosquitoes, being in the Great Black Swamp area. So thankfully with the bee bath, it's shallower than a bird bath. And when we add these rocks in here, it makes it a lot harder for their larvae to move around and spread out. Now, mosquitoes will lay their eggs and they'll thrive literally in puddles. But having these rocks in do help discourage the mosquitoes from using this. But that is something, especially in the summertime, to be really cognizant. So you're going to be wanting to look to see if you have little wiggly larvae swimming around in here. Another big thing, when you're on the topic of cleaning these, you do not need to use soap. Soap will actually be harmful to the insects, to the bees, so you're just going to want to use water. This is outside. Bees actually smell old water or a little more stagnant water better than the clean water, so it's okay to let this sit. So, but if you notice that it's looking really grimy, you're starting to get mosquitoes, go ahead and dump it out, spray it out, put everything back, make sure you have your rocks in so the bees can, and all the other pollinators, insects can get out of it. But in terms of mosquitoes, you just have to be cognizant, really check on it to make sure you don't have a stagnant breeding pool. And the deeper the containers you do use, so if I was using this cup, I would have to check on it a lot more, not to refill it, but specifically in the summertime to look for mosquitoes and to see if I need to change it because it's getting too stagnant and too filled with potential undesirable insects. And then on the note of Julie with the shade tolerant plants, I actually do know of two that are really nice that are natives. Lyre leaf sage tolerates shade very, very well, and it is native, as well as cardinal flower is a really nice, brilliant one that has bright red flowers, which is very uncommon to find for shade plants. Usually shade plants tend to be in the blues and the purples, as well as our common violet is also a lovely, lovely plant to have. You often find it in yards next to dandelions, but they like the shade as well.
And can they hear me, Alyssa?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I was on mute. I did it again. See,
No, I wanted to add to what Lauren said about the common blue violet. It's also a host plant for the great spangled fritillary, which is one of the butterflies that I showed a photo of earlier. So it's a good plant to have. Yes.
Hey, Lauren, could you do the split screen? Okay, cool. So we're getting close to our time, so I just wanted to close it here, have us all on one screen for a second. If anybody has any last minute questions, let us know. But I wanted to thank you, obviously, for joining us. And I also wanted to point out that if you have kids, if you are a kid, we have a storybook trail in Central Ohio at Alum Creek State Park that is open. And if you're around Central Ohio, it's a super cute trail about honeybees and pollinators. So I encourage you to check it out. And actually, Lauren's getting one up at her park, and it's going to be called Where the Butterflies Grow. And that should be opening up in just a couple weeks. And so that's at Maumee Bay State Park. And for those of you in Southeast Ohio, Dillon State Park is getting a storybook trail called Miss Maple's Seeds. Awesome, about seed dispersal and the habitat that those plants help. And then last but not least, John Bryan State Park in Southwest Ohio is getting a storybook trail called As an Oak Tree Grows. And they're just all super cool stories. They'll rotate around the parks around the state. So the books will change, but just thought, we have quite a few books on pollinators, and I wanted to let you all know that that those are coming soon. The one in Alum Creek is already there though, so check it out. Do you guys have anything to add before we close it out here? Are we?
No, but it's warming up. Look out for pollinators. It's super neat to see everybody starting to get really active as the flowers are starting to bloom. So that's definitely something I highly recommend. If you don't know what you see, post it on our social media. We love identifying this stuff. So that's something, definitely use this as a resource to help you identify, especially if you're really interested in this.
Yeah, or iNaturalist.
Yes.
If you don't have iNaturalist, download the app. I use it all the time. And you kind of get almost an instant answer from that of what your picture is. So pretty cool. But thanks again for joining us. Check out our YouTube page. Julie has awesome videos about wildflowers, and I love Lauren's creature features. So we've got so many cool videos there. Check us out, and thanks for joining us today. See ya.